Mike and I had been best friends since college, and we'd always talked about taking a camping trip together. After years of dreaming and planning, we finally made it happen. We picked a spot in the Appalachian Mountains, far enough from civilization that we wouldn't hear the noise of cars or see the glow of city lights. It was going to be a weekend of hiking, campfires, and stargazing, just two guys reconnecting with nature. The first day went perfectly. We hiked for hours, set up camp in a clearing surrounded by tall pines, and cooked dinner over a small fire. As the sun set, the world around us turned dark and quiet, with only the sounds of the forest filling the air. It was peaceful. We sat by the fire, talking about old memories and making jokes about how neither of us was exactly a survival expert. Mike even tried to scare me with some campfire ghost stories, but they were so ridiculous that we ended up laughing instead. Around midnight, we decided to call it a night. I woke up a few hours later. Something felt off. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but then I realized Mike wasn't in his sleeping bag. At first, I thought maybe he had just stepped out to use the bathroom. I waited a few minutes, but he didn't come back. "Mike!" I called out, trying to keep my voice calm. There was no answer. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, the cold air hitting me immediately. I scanned the area with my flashlight. Mike's boots were still by the tent, which was strange. Why would he go out barefoot? "Mike, this isn't funny," I shouted. The only response was the rustling of leaves in the wind. I felt a knot of fear forming in my stomach. Mike wasn't the type to wander off without saying something, especially not in the middle of the night. I grabbed my flashlight and started looking for him, calling his name as I went. The forest was unnervingly silent. It was so quiet that I could hear my own breathing and the crunch of my boots on the ground. The beam of my flashlight lit up the trees and bushes, but there was no sign of Mike. I walked farther from the campsite than I intended. I kept telling myself, just a little further, he'll be there. He has to be there. But he wasn't. After what felt like an eternity, I stopped and took a deep breath. That's when I noticed something strange. The forest didn't feel normal anymore. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was oppressive. And then I heard it, a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I stood still, I realized it wasn't. It sounded like a voice, far away and muffled, as if someone was speaking just out of earshot. I turned in the direction of the sound, my flashlight trembling in my hand. "Mike!" I called out. The whispering stopped. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, I considered running back to the campsite, but I couldn't leave Mike. What if he was hurt? What if he was lost and needed help? I took a step toward where I thought the whisper had come from. Then another. The ground beneath my boots felt soft and uneven, like it hadn't been walked on in years. I found him in a small clearing. He was sitting cross-legged on the ground, facing the woods. His back was to me, and he wasn't moving. "Mike!" I called, relief flooding through me. "What the hell are you doing out here?" He didn't respond. I walked closer, the beam of my flashlight illuminating his hunched shoulders and messy hair. Something was wrong. His posture was stiff, unnatural. "Mike!" I said again, my voice shaking now. Finally, he turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see the side of his face. His eyes were wide and empty, staring into nothing. "It didn't like me leaving," he whispered. His voice sent chills down my spine. It didn't sound like him. It was flat, lifeless, like he was reciting words that weren't his own. "What are you talking about? Who didn't like you leaving?" I asked, stepping closer. He didn't answer. He just turned his head back toward the woods and started to rock slightly back and forth. I didn't know what to do. My best friend, the guy I'd known for years, was acting like a stranger. I reached out and grabbed his shoulder, trying to shake him out of whatever trance he was in. "Mike, snap out of it. You're scaring me." That's when he started crying. Not normal crying, though. It was this deep, gut-wrenching sob that sounded more like an animal than a person. I didn't know what else to do, so I sat down beside him and waited. Eventually, his crying stopped, and he just sat there, staring into the woods. "We have to go back to the campsite," I said quietly. He didn't move. "Mike, please. We can't stay out here." Finally, he nodded, slowly and reluctantly, like he was being forced to leave something behind. I helped him to his feet, and we made our way back to the tent in silence. The rest of the night was awful. Mike didn't say a word. He just sat by the fire, staring into the flames with that same blank expression. I tried asking him what had happened, but he wouldn't answer. When the sun finally rose, I packed up our gear and told him we were leaving. He didn't argue. He just followed me silently as we made our way back to the trailhead. It's been months since that trip, and Mike still won't talk about what happened. I've asked him a dozen times, but he always changes the subject or says he doesn't remember. But I know he remembers. Sometimes, when I look at him, I catch him staring off into the distance with that same empty look he had in the clearing. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear that faint whisper, as if it's calling me back to the woods. My wife, Sarah, and I had been planning our camping trip to Utah's deserts for months. After years of living in the city, we both needed a break from the noise and the stress. We wanted to feel connected to nature again, to be surrounded by open skies and silence. The desert seemed perfect, a place where we could relax, far from the chaos of everyday life. We arrived at our campsite in the late afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to dip low in the sky. The landscape was beautiful, red rocks stretching as far as the eye could see, dotted with sparse shrubs and twisted juniper trees. There wasn't another soul in sight. It felt like we had the whole desert to ourselves. We set up our tent on a flat patch of ground near a small outcropping of rocks. As the sun set, we cooked dinner over the campfire and watched the colors of the desert shift from bright orange to deep purple. The sky turned dark, and a blanket of stars appeared, brighter and clearer than we'd ever seen them before. "This is amazing," Sarah said, leaning back in her camping chair and looking up at the sky. "I can't believe how quiet it is out here." I nodded, feeling the same sense of awe. The silence wasn't just peaceful, it was absolute. No cars, no voices, no distant hum of the city. Just the crackle of our fire and the occasional chirp of a cricket. As the night went on, I started to feel a little uneasy. It wasn't anything obvious, just a faint, nagging feeling that I couldn't shake. I didn't want to ruin the moment, so I kept it to myself. Sarah must have felt it too, because after a while she said, "Do you ever get the feeling someone's watching you?" I froze, my stomach tightening. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she said, glancing over her shoulder. I keep thinking I see something out of the corner of my eye. Like movement. But when I look, there's nothing there." I tried to laugh it off. "You've been watching too many horror movies." She didn't laugh. We decided to call it a night around 11 p.m. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the air had grown cold. We climbed into our tent and zipped it up tight, wrapping ourselves in our sleeping bags. I thought I'd fall asleep easily, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me. Every little noise outside the tent made me jump. Was that the wind? Or something else? At some point, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, I was wide awake again. Something had woken me up, but I didn't know what. I lay there, listening. At first, all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing and Sarah's soft snores. But then, faintly, I heard it, footsteps. My heart started pounding. The sound was faint but unmistakable, slow, deliberate steps, crunching softly on the rocky ground outside. "Sarah," I whispered, shaking her gently. She stirred, groggy and confused. "What's wrong?" "Listen," I said. She sat up, and we both stayed completely still, straining to hear. The footsteps had stopped. "Maybe it's an animal," she whispered. "Maybe," I said, though I didn't believe it. The steps had been too slow, too measured. We waited for what felt like an eternity, but the sound didn't come back. Eventually, Sarah lay back down, though I could tell she was still uneasy. Around 2 a.m., I woke up again. This time, it wasn't footsteps that woke me, it was a feeling. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing on end, and my chest felt tight. I reached for the flashlight we'd left by the sleeping bag and unzipped the tent as quietly as I could. The cold night air hit me immediately, but I barely noticed. I shone the flashlight around the campsite, scanning the rocks and shrubs for any sign of movement. At first, I didn't see anything. But then, at the very edge of the light's reach, I saw it. There was a figure standing just beyond the fire pit, where the faint glow of the embers barely illuminated the ground. It was tall and thin, unnaturally so. Its arms hung at its sides, too long to be human. I couldn't make out any features. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel it staring at me. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to wake Sarah, but I couldn't move. I couldn't look away from the figure. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It just stood there, like it was waiting for something. Finally, I managed to whisper, "Sarah." She stirred again, muttering something half asleep. "Sarah, wake up," I said, my voice shaking. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. What's going on? I didn't answer. I just pointed the flashlight toward the figure. But when I looked back, it was gone. What are you pointing at? She asked, her voice sharp with fear. There was someone out there, I said, my voice barely audible. Sarah's eyes widened. What do you mean, someone? Like another camper? I don't think so, I said, my throat dry. We spent the rest of the night huddled in the tent, too scared to sleep. Every time we heard a noise outside, we held our breath, waiting for the footsteps to return or for the figure to appear again. When the first light of dawn finally broke, we packed up our gear as fast as we could. We didn't even eat breakfast. We just wanted to get out of there. As we drove away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure standing in the middle of the road, watching us leave. It's been years since that night, but I still can't explain what we saw. I've tried convincing myself that it was just a trick of the light or my imagination, but deep down, I know it wasn't. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in the dark, I swear I can still feel those eyes on me. Watching. Waiting. After a tough year, I decided to go on a solo camping trip to the Pacific Northwest. Life had been overwhelming, work, family issues, and constant stress. I needed to clear my head and find some peace. The thought of being alone in nature, surrounded by towering trees and fresh air, was exactly what I needed. I packed my gear and drove for hours until I reached a remote trailhead deep in the forest. The place was beautiful and untouched, far from civilization. It was exactly what I had hoped for. I felt calm for the first time in months. I spent the first day hiking, taking in the sights and sounds of the forest. The trees were massive, their branches creating a canopy that filtered the sunlight into soft, golden beams. Birds chirped overhead, and the occasional rustle of leaves reminded me of how alive the woods were. By late afternoon, I found a good spot to set up camp, a small clearing near a gentle stream. I pitched my tent, gathered some firewood, and cooked a simple dinner over the fire. As the sun set and the forest grew dark, I felt a deep sense of relaxation. Little did I know that peace wouldn't last long. That first night was uneventful, and I woke up the next morning feeling refreshed. I spent the day exploring the area, taking pictures, and enjoying the solitude. By the time I returned to camp, the sun was already setting. As night fell, the forest became eerily quiet. The cheerful sounds of birds and rustling leaves were replaced by an oppressive silence. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just my imagination. After all, I was alone in an unfamiliar place. It was normal to feel a little uneasy. I sat by the fire for a while, staring into the flames and letting my mind wander. But that's when I heard it. A voice. At first, it was faint, so faint that I thought I might have imagined it. It sounded like a child calling for help. Help me. I froze, straining to listen. The voice came again, distant but clear. Help me. My heart started pounding. Who would be out here, miles from the nearest road or town? And why would a child be alone in the middle of the forest? I grabbed my flashlight and stood up, hesitating for a moment. Every instinct told me to stay put, but the voice was so desperate, so helpless. I couldn't just ignore it. Hello. I called out. Is someone there? There was no response, just the sound of the voice fading deeper into the woods. Against my better judgment, I decided to follow the voice. I told myself that if it really was someone in trouble, I couldn't just leave them. I grabbed my jacket, flashlight, and a small knife, just in case. As I moved deeper into the forest, the voice continued, always just out of reach. Help me. It sounded like it was coming from a young girl, her tone full of fear. The sound pulled me forward, guiding me through the dark. But something felt off. The voice didn't seem to move naturally. One moment, it would sound close, almost right in front of me. The next, it would be distant, as if it had moved far away in an instant. The farther I went, the stranger the forest became. The trees grew denser, their gnarled branches twisting together like clawed hands. The air felt heavy, damp, and cold. My flashlight's beam seemed weaker, barely piercing the darkness. I started to feel disoriented. I couldn't tell which direction I had come from, and the voice kept leading me deeper and deeper. Help me. It sounded closer now, almost too close. I stopped in my tracks, scanning the area with my flashlight. But there was no one there. Hello. I called out again, my voice shaking. Still, there was no response, just the sound of the voice moving farther away once more. I don't know how long I walked. Time felt strange out there, like hours and minutes were blending together. Eventually, I realized I had no idea where I was. My heart sank as I looked around and saw nothing but trees in every direction. Panic began to set in. I called out, but my own voice sounded weak and small. I tried to retrace my steps, but everything looked the same. The voice had stopped now, leaving me alone in an oppressive silence. I turned off my flashlight for a moment to save the batteries. That's when I heard it. A rustling sound. It came from behind me, and it was close. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly turned around. "Who's there?" I whispered. The rustling stopped. I shone my flashlight in the direction of the sound, but there was nothing there. Just trees and shadows. I started walking again, this time faster. I didn't care about the voice anymore. I just wanted to get back to my camp. But no matter which way I went, the forest seemed endless. Then I heard the rustling again, this time from my left. I spun around, my flashlight trembling in my hand. "Stay away," I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees. The rustling stopped again, but I felt something watching me. I could feel its eyes on me, though I couldn't see anything. Finally, I saw something, a faint glow in the distance. My heart leapt with hope. It had to be my campfire. I ran toward the light, ignoring the branches that scratched at my arms and face. But as I got closer, the glow disappeared. There was nothing there. That's when I saw the footprints. They were small, like a child's, and they circled around me in the dirt. My blood ran cold. I hadn't seen or heard anyone, but the prints were fresh. I don't remember much after that. I must have wandered for hours, clutching my flashlight and knife, jumping at every sound. Eventually, I stumbled upon my campsite. The fire had long since gone out, and the tent looked untouched. It was as if nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the cold fire pit, gripping my knife and flashlight, waiting for the sun to rise. When morning finally came, I packed up my gear as quickly as I could and left. I didn't care about the rest of the trip. I just wanted to get out of that forest. To this day, I don't know what I heard that night. Was it a real person? An animal? Something else? All I know is that I'll never go camping alone again. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I think I can still hear that faint, desperate voice calling from the woods. "Help me." The mountains had always been my favorite place to escape. There was something about the towering peaks, the crisp air, and the endless trails that made me feel alive. I'd hiked most of the trails in the region, but this time, I wanted to try something different. A coworker had told me about an old, less-traveled trail deep in the mountains. It wasn't on any maps, but he said it offered the best views and complete solitude. "It's a little tricky to find," he'd warned, "but it's worth it. Just be careful. It's easy to get lost up there." I brushed off his caution. I'd been hiking for years and prided myself on my sense of direction. A remote trail sounded perfect, exactly what I needed to clear my head. I set out early in the morning, the sun just beginning to rise. I parked my car at a small pull-off by the road, shouldered my pack, and started walking. Following the vague directions my coworker had given me, I eventually found the trailhead. It was barely visible, hidden behind thick undergrowth, but I spotted an old wooden signpost leaning at an awkward angle. The letters were faded, but I could just make out the word Summit. The trail was narrow and overgrown, winding through dense forest. I couldn't help but notice how quiet it was. There were no birds singing, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my boots crunching on the dirt path. After a few hours of steady climbing, I reached a clearing. The view was breathtaking. The entire valley stretched out below me, the forest a sea of green, with snow-capped peaks rising in the distance. I set my pack down and sat on a rock to catch my breath. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. She was standing at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden by the trees. She was wearing a red jacket and hiking boots, her long dark hair tied back in a ponytail. "Hello," I called out, waving. She didn't respond. I stood up, feeling a little uneasy. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" She finally turned to look at me, but her expression was blank. She didn't look scared or lost, just empty. "Are you lost?" I asked, taking a step toward her. She turned and walked into the trees without a word. I hesitated. Something about the encounter didn't feel right, but I couldn't just ignore her. What if she really was lost? I grabbed my pack and followed her into the woods. The trees were dense here, their branches weaving together to block out most of the sunlight. "Hello." I called out again. Where are you going? I caught glimpses of her red jacket through the trees, always just ahead of me. I tried to close the distance, but no matter how fast I walked, I couldn't seem to catch up. The forest grew darker as I went deeper. The air felt heavier, colder. I stopped for a moment to catch my breath and realized I couldn't hear her footsteps anymore. Hey, are you there? I shouted, my voice echoing. There was no reply. I turned in a slow circle, trying to get my bearings. The trail was gone, replaced by uneven ground and tangled roots. I realized with a sinking feeling that I had no idea where I was. I tried to backtrack, but everything looked the same. The trees seemed to close in around me, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal arms. My heart was racing now, panic creeping in. Then I saw her again. She was standing about 20 feet away, her back to me. Her red jacket stood out starkly against the dark trees. Wait, I shouted, running toward her. She turned her head slightly, just enough for me to see the side of her face. Her eyes were wide, unblinking. Why are you following me? She whispered. Her voice was soft but clear, and it sent chills down my spine. Before I could respond, she turned and walked deeper into the forest. I didn't want to follow her anymore. Everything about this felt wrong. But I couldn't just leave her out here. What if she was in trouble? Against my better judgment, I kept going. The deeper I went, the stranger the forest became. The trees looked twisted, their bark peeling in long, jagged strips. The air was so cold now that I could see my breath. I lost sight of her again, but I could hear her voice, faint and distant. This way. It wasn't a plea or a call for help. It sounded almost teasing. I don't know how long I wandered. Time felt distorted, like hours and minutes were blending together. I kept thinking I saw her out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned, there was nothing there. Then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping sound, like someone drumming their fingers against a tree trunk. It was close, too close. I spun around, shining my flashlight in every direction, but I didn't see anything. Who's there? I shouted, my voice cracking. The tapping stopped. I was completely lost now, both physically and mentally. My legs were shaking, my mind racing with fear and confusion. I needed to find a way out, but every direction looked the same. Then I saw the red jacket again, hanging from a low branch. It looked old, the fabric faded and torn, as if it had been there for years. Beneath it was a small pile of stones, carefully stacked like a marker. I didn't understand what I was looking at, but it filled me with an overwhelming sense of dread. I turned and ran. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. The forest seemed endless, the trees blurring together as I stumbled over roots and rocks. Eventually, I broke through the tree-line and found myself back on the trail. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air, tears streaming down my face. When I looked up, I saw my car in the distance. Somehow, I had made it back to the trailhead. I don't remember the drive home. My mind was a blur, replaying everything I had seen and heard. I told a few close friends about the experience, but they all said the same thing. I must have imagined it, or maybe I had gotten dehydrated and disoriented. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night, I dream about her, the girl in the red jacket, standing at the edge of the clearing, her empty eyes staring right through me. For as long as I could remember, I had loved the outdoors. Camping trips, hiking, fishing. I craved the peace that came from being surrounded by nature. So when my old college friends, Mark and Jenna, invited me to join them on a weekend camping trip, I couldn't say no. The location was remote, deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Mark said he'd found it on a forum for serious hikers. A hidden gem, he called it. The place was off the beaten path, completely secluded. Perfect, I thought. I packed my gear and met them at the trailhead on a Friday afternoon. The weather was perfect, clear skies, a cool breeze, and the promise of a beautiful weekend. We started our hike, the trail winding through dense woods and up steep inclines. The further we went, the more I felt like we were stepping into another world. The trees were massive, their thick branches creating a canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. It was beautiful, but there was something about the silence that felt heavy. After several hours, we reached a small clearing by a creek and decided to set up camp. It was a peaceful spot, surrounded by trees, with the sound of water trickling over rocks nearby. We pitched our tents, built a fire, and settled in for the evening. As the sun set, the forest grew darker than I expected. The canopy above let in almost no moonlight, and the shadows around our campfire seemed to stretch endlessly. Mark was the first to comment on it. "It's weird how dark it gets out here," he said, poking at the fire with a stick. "Even with the fire, it feels like the shadows are closer." Jenna laughed nervously. "Don't start with that creepy stuff," she said. "I'm already on edge." I chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "It's just the woods. Shadows always seem bigger out here." But deep down, I felt it too, that strange sense that the darkness was pressing in, watching us. We stayed up late, talking and joking, trying to ignore the eerie atmosphere. Eventually, we crawled into our tents, the fire reduced to glowing embers. I was tired from the hike and expected to fall asleep quickly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I lay there, listening to the sounds of the forest. It was quiet, too quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just silence. Then I heard it, a faint rustling sound like someone, or something, moving through the underbrush. I sat up, my heart racing. "Mark, Jenna," I called out softly. "Yeah." Mark's voice came from the next tent. "Did you hear that?" There was a pause, then, "Probably just an animal." Jenna spoke up, her voice shaky. "It sounded close." We sat in silence for a few moments, listening. The rustling stopped, and the forest went silent again. "Let's just get some sleep," Mark said, though I could hear the unease in his voice. I eventually drifted off, but it wasn't a restful sleep. I kept waking up, feeling like someone was standing just outside my tent. Every time I looked, there was nothing there. The next morning, Jenna looked exhausted. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted as we ate breakfast. "I kept hearing, I don't know, footsteps or something." Mark shrugged it off. "It's the woods. Animals move around at night. It's normal." I wanted to believe him, but the look on Jenna's face told me she didn't buy it either. We spent the day exploring the area, hiking up a nearby ridge for a better view. The scenery was stunning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every so often, I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of shadow or a branch swaying when there was no wind. At one point, Jenna stopped suddenly, her eyes wide. "What's wrong?" I asked. She pointed to the ground. "Look." There were footprints in the dirt, bare, human footprints. They were larger than any of ours and looked fresh, like they had just been made. Mark tried to laugh it off. "Probably another hiker. Who hikes out here without shoes?" Jenna shot back. None of us had an answer. That night, the unease only grew. We sat around the fire again, trying to keep things light, but the silence of the forest was oppressive. "I feel like we're not alone out here," Jenna said quietly. Mark rolled his eyes. "You're letting your imagination get to you." But I agreed with her. I hadn't said anything, but I felt it too, that sense of being watched, like the shadows themselves were alive. After we went to bed, the real terror began. I woke up to the sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, circling our campsite. My heart was pounding as I lay there, frozen, listening. The footsteps stopped near my tent, and I could hear breathing, slow and shallow, like someone was standing right outside. "Mark," I whispered, my voice barely audible. There was no response. I gathered my courage and unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. My flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, but there was nothing there. I crawled out, trembling, and shone the light around the campsite. Jenna's and Mark's tents were zipped up tight, and the fire had died completely. The shadows were deeper than ever, pooling around the trees like ink. Then I saw it. A figure, tall and thin, standing at the edge of the clearing. It was just barely visible, its form blending with the shadows. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice shaking. The figure didn't move. Mark and Jenna scrambled out of their tents, startled by my shouting. "What's going on?" Mark asked, rubbing his eyes. "There's someone out there," I said, pointing toward the trees. They looked, but the figure was gone. "Are you sure?" Jenna asked, her voice trembling. "I know what I saw," I insisted. We stayed up the rest of the night, huddled by the fire, weapons in hand, Mark with his hunting knife, me with a heavy branch I'd grabbed. When dawn finally came, we packed up and left in a hurry. None of us spoke much on the hike back to the car. The forest felt different in the daylight, less menacing, but the sense of being watched never left. As we loaded our gear into the car, I glanced back toward the trailhead. For just a moment, I thought I saw the figure again, standing among the trees. But when I blinked, it was gone. We never talked about that trip again. I stopped going into the mountains after that, and I know Mark and Jenna did too. To this day, I don't know what we encountered out there. But sometimes late at night, I think about those shadows and the figure that seemed to rise out of them. And I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for the next group of campers to wander too far into its domain. Camping had always been my go-to escape when life got too loud. I loved the simplicity of it, setting up a tent, cooking over a fire, and falling asleep under the stars. So when a long weekend came around, I decided to take a solo trip to a forested area I had visited years ago. It wasn't a well-known spot, which was perfect. I wanted peace, not the hum of fellow campers or the distant buzz of nearby highways. This place was tucked away, miles from the nearest town. I loaded my gear, picked up a few snacks, and headed out early in the morning. The drive was uneventful, though the roads became narrower and bumpier the closer I got to the trailhead. By the time I arrived, the sun was high, and the dense forest stretched out before me like a green sea. I parked my car on a patch of gravel, grabbed my backpack, and started the hike to my chosen campsite. The trail wound through tall pines and thick undergrowth. Sunlight filtered through the branches in patches, casting shadows that danced with the breeze. It was quiet, almost too quiet. No birds chirping, no rustling leaves, just the crunch of my boots on the dirt path. I shrugged it off. Sometimes the forest was like that. After about 2 hours of hiking, I reached a clearing beside a small creek. The spot was perfect. Flat ground for my tent, access to fresh water, and a decent view of the surrounding trees. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and sat down to enjoy the stillness. The day passed peacefully. I spent the afternoon reading, exploring the nearby area, and enjoying the solitude. As the sun began to set, I lit a small fire and cooked a simple meal. That's when I first heard it. It was faint at first, so faint I thought I had imagined it. A soft, high-pitched laugh, like that of a child, carried on the wind. I froze, listening intently. The sound didn't come again, and the forest remained silent. I shook my head and chuckled nervously. Maybe I was just hearing things. But deep down, I felt uneasy. The sun dipped below the horizon, and darkness swallowed the forest. My fire crackled, the only source of light and warmth in the encroaching night. I sat close to it, the shadows around me growing darker and thicker with each passing minute. Then I heard it again. This time, it was louder, unmistakable, a soft, giggling laugh, coming from somewhere beyond the firelight. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. There was no response, just the sound of the creek and the crackling fire. I told myself it must be the wind or some strange animal call, but the laugh was so human, so deliberate, that I couldn't fully convince myself. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing only trunks and branches. "Is someone there?" I asked, louder this time. The laugh came again, this time from a different direction, behind me. I spun around, the flashlight trembling in my hand, but there was nothing there. My heart was racing now. I sat back down by the fire, gripping the flashlight tightly. The night dragged on, the laughter coming and going. Sometimes it was faint, almost playful, like a child playing hide and seek. Other times it was louder, closer, as if whoever, or whatever, was out there was circling my campsite. I barely slept, every sound setting me on edge. When dawn finally broke, I felt a wave of relief. The sunlight chased away the shadows, and the forest felt less menacing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I spent the morning debating whether to pack up and leave, but I convinced myself to stay. Maybe I was just overreacting. It had been a long day, and my imagination had gotten the better of me. The second day passed much like the first, though I couldn't fully relax. Every time I ventured too far from the campsite, I felt like I was being watched. By the time night fell, I was on edge. I built the fire higher, its warm glow pushing back the darkness. But the laughter returned. This time, it started earlier, before the forest was fully dark. I was sitting by the fire when I heard it, soft, distant, but unmistakable. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound brave. The laughter didn't stop. It grew louder, moving through the trees like it was taunting me. I grabbed my flashlight and knife, my hands shaking. "If someone's out there, this isn't funny." The laughter stopped abruptly, plunging the forest into silence. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then I heard a voice. "Why are you afraid?" The voice was soft, almost childlike, but there was something wrong about it, something hollow, like it didn't belong. I shone my flashlight into the trees, my heart pounding. "Show yourself." A figure stepped out from the shadows. It was small, about the size of a child, and its outline was blurry, like it didn't fully belong in this world. It stood there, staring at me with dark, empty eyes. Then it smiled, its mouth stretching impossibly wide. I stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. When I looked up again, the figure was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire, clutching my knife, waiting for the sun to rise. The laughter came and went, always just out of reach, echoing through the trees. When dawn finally broke, I packed up my gear as quickly as I could. I didn't care about breakfast or the trail. I just wanted to get out of there. The hike back to the car felt endless. Every rustling leaf and snapping twig made me jump, convinced that something was following me. When I finally reached the trailhead and saw my car, I nearly cried with relief. I threw my gear into the trunk and got in, locking the doors before starting the engine. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For just a moment, I thought I saw something standing at the edge of the forest, a small figure, smiling, watching me leave. I haven't been camping since that trip. The forest, once my refuge, now feels like a place I can never return to. And sometimes late at night, when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear that laugh again, soft, teasing, and just beyond the edge of the light. I never liked camping much, but I had convinced myself this trip would be different. It was supposed to be a weekend of solitude, a break from the constant noise of city life. I had picked a remote spot deep in the national forest, far from any designated camping areas. A place where I wouldn't see another person for miles. That was the plan. I arrived late in the afternoon, the sun beginning its slow descent behind the trees. The air smelled fresh, untouched, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The trail leading to the spot I had chosen was barely visible, more of a deer path than a real trail. It was rugged, winding through dense foliage, up a slight incline before leveling off into a clearing. The spot was perfect. A flat piece of land surrounded by tall trees, with a small stream trickling nearby. I set my gear down and took a deep breath. No traffic, no voices, no hum of electronics. Just the distant rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of birds. I started setting up my tent immediately. The sun was dipping lower, and I didn't want to fumble with it in the dark. The ground was firm but manageable, and I drove the stakes deep, securing the fabric against any wind that might pick up later. Once the tent was up, I gathered firewood. Most of it was damp, but I found enough dry pieces under fallen logs. I stacked them carefully and pulled out my fire starter. It took a few minutes, but soon enough, flames flickered to life, casting long shadows across the clearing. I sat by the fire, eating a simple meal from my pack. The quiet was nice. I had spent weeks looking forward to this trip, planning it down to the last detail. But as the last traces of daylight faded, a sense of unease settled over me. It was irrational. I had camped before, though never this deep into the woods. But something about the darkness pressing in from all sides felt different. I forced myself to ignore it. I finished eating, cleaned up my small campsite, and tossed some more wood onto the fire. I didn't want to go to sleep yet. The fire was comforting, its light keeping the blackness at bay. Then I heard it, a sound in the distance. Faint, barely audible over the crackling flames. A rustling, maybe an animal moving through the underbrush. Probably a deer. I kept still, listening. The sound stopped. Just the wind, I told myself. Or a rabbit. Maybe even a raccoon. But a few minutes later, it came again. Closer this time. A distinct shuffling noise. Not the quick scurry of a small animal, but something larger. Heavier. I reached for my flashlight and aimed it toward the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating trunks and branches, but nothing else. I swept the light slowly, searching. Nothing. I turned it off and sat back, my heart beating faster than before. It was nothing. Just the usual sounds of the forest. I had chosen a remote location. Of course, there were animals around, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I stayed up late, staring into the fire, listening. The noises didn't come back. Eventually, I convinced myself I was being paranoid and crawled into my tent. I zipped it up tight, even though I knew it wouldn't keep anything out. Lying there, wrapped in my sleeping bag, I listened. The night was silent except for the occasional crackle of the fire outside. I forced myself to close my eyes. At some point, I drifted off. Then something woke me. A sound. Close. I held my breath, ears straining. The fire had burned low, its glow barely reaching the tent. And then I heard it again. Footsteps. right outside. Slow, deliberate. My stomach twisted into knots. My mind raced. A bear. A person. No one should be out here. This spot was miles from the nearest campsite. I stayed completely still. The footsteps stopped. I listened, barely breathing. Nothing. Minutes passed. Then scraping. Right against the tent fabric. I felt my chest tighten. Someone was right outside. I didn't move. Didn't make a sound. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the sound stopped. The footsteps retreated, fading into the trees. I stayed frozen in place for what felt like an eternity. When I finally found the courage to move, I reached for my knife. I gripped it tight, every muscle tense. I didn't sleep after that. I just lay there, waiting for the first light of dawn. When morning finally came, I unzipped the tent slowly, peering out. The fire was nothing but ashes, and my surroundings looked the same as before. But then I saw them. Footprints. Human, leading from the trees to my tent. Then away again. I packed up immediately. My hands shook as I stuffed my gear into my pack. I kept my knife within reach, scanning the trees constantly. The hike back to my car felt longer than before. Every snap of a twig made my pulse jump. I didn't stop. I didn't rest. I just kept walking, fast but steady, until I saw my car through the trees. When I finally locked myself inside, I exhaled for the first time in hours. My hands were still shaking. I don't know who was out there. I don't know what they wanted. But I do know one thing. I'm never camping alone again. I had planned the trip for months. A solo camping weekend deep in the forest, away from people, noise, and responsibilities. It was supposed to be a test for myself, a chance to disconnect from the world and rely only on what I carried. The location was chosen carefully, a remote area in a national forest, miles from any designated campsites. It was off the beaten path, requiring a long hike through thick trees and uneven ground. That was exactly what I wanted. The drive to the trailhead took most of the morning. I arrived just after noon, parked my truck at the small, nearly abandoned lot, and double-checked my gear. Everything was packed tightly in my backpack. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water, knife, flashlight, extra batteries. Enough supplies to last me 2 nights. The hike-in was exhausting but peaceful. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. The trail was barely a trail at all, just a narrow, winding path through thick underbrush and towering trees. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of damp earth and pine. After a few hours, I reached my spot, a small clearing near a shallow creek. The trees stood tall and dense around it, blocking most of the sky. The ground was dry, covered in fallen leaves and pine needles. I set down my pack and stretched, my muscles aching from the hike. I had at least 2 hours of daylight left, enough time to set up camp and gather wood. I pitched my tent first, making sure it was secured against the uneven ground. It was a small one-person tent, just big enough for me and my gear. Once it was up, I unrolled my sleeping bag inside, then went to work collecting firewood. Most of the fallen branches were damp, but I found enough dry ones under thicker logs. I stacked them neatly by the fire pit I made from rocks, then used my lighter to get a flame going. It took some effort, but soon a small fire crackled to life, casting a soft glow over the clearing. As the sun dipped lower, the forest around me darkened. The deep greens of the trees turned into silhouettes, blending together in the fading light. The air grew colder, and the sounds of the forest changed, birds quieting down, insects taking their place. I sat by the fire, eating a simple meal from my pack. The warmth of the flames was comforting, pushing back the encroaching darkness. Then a sound, distant but distinct, a rustling in the underbrush. I stopped chewing and listened. Probably an animal, a deer or a raccoon. It wasn't uncommon for wildlife to move around at dusk, but something about it felt off. The sound wasn't quick, like a startled animal darting through the woods. It was slow, measured, a careful movement. I turned my flashlight toward the trees, sweeping the beam back and forth. The light bounced off trunks and branches, but nothing else. The sound had stopped. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks. The woods were full of sounds, twigs snapping, leaves shifting in the wind. I forced myself to relax and focused on the fire. The flames flickered and danced, casting long shadows behind me. Time passed. The night settled in. Then another sound. Closer. A branch breaking. Not a small twig, a thick, solid snap. Something was there. My body tensed. I turned my flashlight toward the trees again, my pulse hammering. Still nothing. I stared into the darkness, straining my ears. Silence. I kept the flashlight aimed at the trees for a long time before finally lowering it. The firelight flickered, making shadows shift and dance. I took a deep breath. Maybe a falling branch. Maybe an animal stepping on old wood. I didn't like how uneasy I felt. I decided to stay up a little longer. I fed the fire more wood, keeping the flames high. The warmth felt like a shield, keeping the darkness at bay. I listened. Nothing. After another hour, exhaustion crept in. I needed sleep. I secured my food, made sure the fire was contained, and crawled into my tent. I zipped it up tight, my flashlight within reach. I lay still, listening. The forest was quiet, except for the occasional crackle of the fire outside. I closed my eyes. Then something moved. Right outside my tent. A slow, deliberate step. I stopped breathing. The fire was still burning. Any animal would avoid it. Another step. Closer. My skin went cold. I gripped my knife. My fingers wrapped so tightly around the handle they ached. Whatever was out there was standing just outside. The fabric of the tent shifted, something touching it. I stayed completely still. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my throat. Then silence. Minutes passed. Then the footsteps retreated. Slowly. Moving away. I lay there for what felt like hours, knife clutched in my hand, every muscle in my body locked. I didn't sleep. Morning came slowly. The first light of dawn filtered through the tent fabric. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. I unzipped the tent carefully, scanning the campsite. Everything looked the same. But then I saw them. Footprints. Human. Leading from the trees to my tent. Then away. I packed up in minutes. Every sound in the forest made my nerves spike. I moved fast, stuffing everything into my pack, my hands shaking. The hike back felt longer. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something, or someone following me. When I finally reached my truck, I locked the doors the second I got inside. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my breath coming fast. I didn't know who had been out there. I didn't want to know. But I knew one thing. I was never camping alone again. I had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. A weekend away from everything, just me, my gear, and the quiet of nature. I had picked a small, remote campground deep in the forest, one that wasn't too well known. Fewer people meant fewer distractions. I wanted to clear my mind, get some fresh air, and reset. The drive took longer than expected. The last few miles were rough, the road narrowing into a twisting path of dirt and gravel. Tall trees lined both sides, their branches stretching overhead, blocking out most of the sky. My GPS had lost signal a while back, but I wasn't too worried. I had the directions saved. When I finally arrived, the place looked almost abandoned. The sign at the entrance was old, the paint faded and peeling. The small wooden booth that should have had a ranger inside was empty. A laminated map was pinned to a board next to it, showing the layout of the campground. There were only 10 sites, scattered far apart from each other, with a single dirt road looping through the area. I drove in slowly, passing a few empty sites. No cars, no tents. The place was completely deserted. That should have been my first sign to turn back. But I didn't. I found my spot, campsite number 7, near the back of the loop, close to a small trail leading into the woods. I parked, shut off the engine, and stepped out. The air was cool and still. The only sounds were the faint rustling of leaves and the distant chirp of birds. I stood there for a moment, taking it in. It felt off. Not wrong. Just off. I shook the feeling away and got to work. I set up my tent near the fire pit, making sure it was secure. The ground was firm but covered in a thick layer of dry leaves. I gathered some firewood from the surrounding area, stacking it neatly. As the sun dipped lower, the forest changed. The light faded fast, shadows stretching long between the trees. The air grew colder. I started a fire. The flames crackled, pushing back the darkness. I sat on the small folding chair I had brought, eating a quick meal from my pack. The fire was warm, the glow comforting. Then I noticed something. A noise. Not close, but not far either. A steady thunk, 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 like wood being chopped. It came from somewhere beyond the trees, past the trail near my site. I frowned. I hadn't seen any other cars. No signs of campers. But someone was out there. I listened for a while, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. I told myself it was just another camper, someone setting up late. Maybe they had hiked in instead of driving. Still, something about it unsettled me. The rhythm never changed. It wasn't fast, not hurried, just steady. A slow, deliberate swing of an axe or a hatchet. I kept the fire going and stayed close to it. Eventually, after what felt like an hour, the chopping stopped. Silence settled over the forest again. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I checked the time. It was late. I needed rest. I made sure everything was in place, food packed away, fire contained, then climbed into my tent. I zipped it up tight, my knife and flashlight within reach. I lay there, staring at the fabric ceiling, listening. Nothing. The fire outside crackled softly. I closed my eyes. Then, somewhere in the distance, closer than before, came the sound of footsteps. Not an animal. Not scattered or uncertain. Slow. Steady. Coming from the direction of the trail. My grip on the knife tightened. I didn't move. The footsteps stopped. Minutes passed. Then, something moved outside my tent. Not walking. Standing. Waiting. I held my breath. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then, just as suddenly, the footsteps retreated. Back down the trail. I stayed awake the rest of the night, knife in hand, staring at the tent walls. Morning came slowly. When I finally unzipped the tent, the campsite looked normal. The fire had died down, the woods were quiet. But near the edge of my sight, leading from the trail to my tent and back again, footprints. Large. Deep. Not boots. Bare feet. I packed up and left immediately. I didn't look back. I had planned this solo camping trip for weeks. I wanted to get away from everything, work, noise, people. I had camped alone before, but never this deep in the woods. This time, I wanted real isolation. No designated campsites, no neighbors in RVs, no sounds of distant conversations. Just me and the forest. I picked a remote section of a national forest, far off the usual trails. The kind of place where you wouldn't run into another person unless they were looking for you specifically. It took most of the afternoon to hike in, my pack heavy with supplies. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. The only sounds were my boots crunching over leaves and the occasional bird call. It felt peaceful at first. After a few miles, I found a good spot. A small clearing near a stream, flat ground, surrounded by tall trees. It was perfect. I set up my tent, making sure the stakes were deep. I unrolled my sleeping bag inside, then gathered firewood from the surrounding area. The sun was getting low, and I didn't want to be scrambling in the dark. By the time I got the fire going, the light was fading. The flames cast flickering shadows, pushing back the darkness. I sat down, ate a quick meal, and let the warmth of the fire sink in. That's when I noticed it. The silence. Not just quiet, absolute silence. No wind, no rustling leaves, no distant chirping. The forest had gone completely still. I told myself it was normal. Animals quiet down at night. But something about it felt wrong. I tried to ignore it and focused on the fire. The flames crackled, the warmth comforting. But the feeling didn't go away. It pressed on me, heavy and suffocating. Then I heard it. A sound, distant but distinct. Footsteps. Not the quick, skittering sounds of an animal. These were slow, deliberate. I turned my head, listening. The sound came from the trees beyond the fire's glow. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it toward the noise. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating trunks and branches, but nothing else. I held still, listening. Nothing. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. The forest was full of noises. Twigs snapping, branches shifting. I forced myself to relax. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I stayed up late, staring into the fire, listening. The footsteps didn't come back. Eventually, exhaustion took over. I checked my gear, secured my food, and crawled into my tent. I zipped it up tight, my knife within reach. I lay there, ears straining for any sound. For a long time, there was nothing. Then, a soft rustling. Close. Right outside my tent. I stopped breathing. My body went rigid. The fire was still burning outside. No animal would come this close. Then a slow, deliberate step. Right next to the tent. The fabric shifted slightly, as if something, or someone, was touching it. My fingers wrapped around my knife. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then silence. Minutes passed. My body ached from staying still. Then, the footsteps moved away. Slow, unhurried, fading into the trees. I didn't move. I stayed like that for hours, knife clutched in my hand, eyes locked on the tent walls. At some point, dawn arrived. The fire had burned down to embers. The forest looked normal. But near my tent, leading from the trees and back again, footprints. Human. I packed up immediately. My hands shook as I stuffed everything into my bag. I kept my knife out, scanning the trees constantly. The hike back to my truck felt endless. Every sound made my pulse spike. When I finally reached my truck, I locked the doors the second I got inside. I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, heart still racing. I don't know who was out there. I don't want to know. But I do know one thing. I'm never camping alone again. I was 16 when I went on that camping trip. I barely knew the people I was with. They were all older, between 19 and 21, and I had only met a couple of them a few times before. It wasn't really my idea to go, but I wanted to get out of town for a few days. I figured camping would be fun, just a couple of nights in the woods, drinking, hanging out, maybe hiking a little. Nothing serious. The campground was way out in rural Oregon, miles from any real road. It wasn't an official site, just a clearing in the woods that some of the older guys knew about. They had camped there before, and they swore no one else ever went out that far. That's what they liked about it. No rangers, no rules, no other campers. The guy who drove us, Kyle, was 21 and had the only car. It was an old beat-up sedan, barely running. He was loud, cocky, always trying to be the center of attention. His girlfriend, Lisa, was 19, and the trip was partly her idea. The others, Dan, Matt, and Eric, were all around 20 and had known each other for years. I was the outsider, tagging along because I had nothing better to do. The drive out took forever. The paved roads turned into gravel, then dirt, then nothing more than a rough trail cutting through the trees. Kyle loved showing off, speeding down the narrow path, making the car bounce over the ruts. Branches scraped the sides, and more than once, I thought we were going to get stuck. But somehow we made it. The campsite was just a small clearing surrounded by thick woods. There was a fire pit in the center, probably from previous trips. A creek ran nearby, shallow and cold, the water moving lazily over smooth rocks. It was a nice spot, quiet, isolated. Too isolated. We set up our tents while Kyle and Lisa started drinking. The rest of us followed. As the night went on, people got louder, the fire got bigger, and everything blurred together. The first night wasn't bad. I stayed mostly quiet, listening to the others joke around and talk about people I didn't know. The fire burned down late, and we all crawled into our tents. The second day was when things went wrong. It started when Kyle got jealous. Lisa had been talking to Dan a lot, laughing, leaning a little too close. Kyle noticed. His mood shifted fast. 1 minute, he was fine. The next, he was fuming. By mid-afternoon, they were fighting. It was bad. The kind of fight where you know someone's going to say something they can't take back. Then Kyle just snapped. He stormed off toward his car, Lisa yelling after him. He got in, started the engine, and before anyone could stop him, he was gone. We all stood there, watching the dust settle on the empty road. At first, no one panicked. We figured he'd cool off and come back. He wouldn't just leave us here. Would he? We spent the rest of the day waiting. It got dark. No sign of Kyle. We told ourselves he'd be back in the morning. He wasn't. By the third day, things got serious. We were out of food. The little water we had left came from the creek, but it tasted weird like dirt and leaves. The mood had changed completely. No more joking, no more laughing. Just frustration, hunger, and the realization that we were truly stranded. We were at least 10 miles from the nearest road, and none of us were sure which direction to go. We argued about whether we should try to hike out or stay put. What if Kyle came back? What if someone else found us? The third night was the worst. No fire, no food, just cold air and the sound of the wind moving through the trees. Every noise made me jump. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, the distant call of some animal I couldn't identify. Sleep was impossible. I lay in my tent, stomach aching, heart pounding. Every hour felt like a lifetime. By morning, we were desperate. That's when we heard it, an engine. A truck. We ran toward the sound, stumbling over rocks and roots. A family had pulled into the clearing, a dad, a mom, 2 kids. We must have looked like hell. Dirty, exhausted, starving. They didn't hesitate. They drove a couple of us to the nearest town, where we finally got a phone and called for help. By the end of the day, we were all picked up, our gear left behind. I never saw any of them again. Never wanted to. That trip changed something in me. I never camped the same way again. I never trusted people the same way again. And I never, ever went anywhere without a way to get back home.